My name is Pierre Atlas. I'm a professor of political science here at Marian University, and I serve as director of the Richard G. Lugar Franciscan Center for Global Studies. This is the first Global Studies Speaker Series event of the year, and before we get going, I'd like to just sort of acknowledge the fact that after our last Speaker Series event last year, actually just a couple of weeks after our final event last year, Richard Lugar passed away. And the center has been named for him for over 10 years. And for those students who were here in December, when he gave his annual Global Studies address, the Lugar Fellow students and the other Global Studies students, he had the opportunity to meet with him before his public address in December. He's always met with students. He spent a lot of time with our students. And it was a very personal thing. He had like an hour meeting basically upstairs with our students before he gave his public lecture, as he did every year. As with all of our events, we film them and post them on YouTube, and his final Global Studies address is available on our website from December 9th. And then just 4 months later, he had passed away, and there was no sign that anything was going to happen. I just want to let you know, I mean, he's been an inspiration for us, for the center, for Marian University. He would meet with us when we take students to Washington. And also, for those of you in the Jewish community, and for those of you who may not know, he was also a very strong supporter of the Indiana Jewish community. And every time he went to Russia or the former Soviet Union with the Nunn-Lugar threat reduction program, and he would actually meet with Russian officials about reducing nuclear arsenals, he always in his briefcase carried a list of names of Jewish refuseniks who were being held in prison, who were not allowed to leave, that were provided to him by the Indianapolis Jewish community. And he would take them and he would bring them to the Russian officials to try and get them to get released. And he had a very strong impact on everything, on Indiana, on the Jewish community, on everything. He's sorely missed, and it was a tremendous loss for all of us. Dr. Inge Auerbacher is a child survivor of the Holocaust. She spent 3 years at the Terezin concentration camp in what was then Czechoslovakia. She was born in Germany. She is a retired chemist and an author of 6 books that are published in 9 languages. She is a recipient of many awards and recognitions, including the Ellis Island Medal of Honor, together with Hillary Clinton and John Glenn. She has an honorary doctorate of humane letters from Long Island University, together with David Dinkins, the first black mayor of New York City, an honorary doctorate from Sioux Falls University in South Dakota. She is the Louis Yavner Citizen Award from the Board of Regents of New York State, Women of Distinction from New York Senate, 2 prestigious awards from Germany, including one from the President of Germany, honorary member of the Blackfeet Nation of Montana, and many more too numerous to mention. She has also spoken at the United Nations. She just returned from, I think, a week in Germany, touring Germany, and before that she was in Russia. She's very active speaking about the Holocaust and sharing her experiences. We are very grateful for Inge, for you being here, and thank you all for coming, and Inge Auerbacher.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Good. I have a loud voice. Anyway, thank you so much, Dr. Atlas and Ilana, and so many other people who are involved in this from the Jewish community and from Marian. And I will just say to everybody, I don't want to miss out, not naming a name, thank you from my heart. I bring you regards from New York City, the Big Apple. It's not the boiling apple anymore. It's hotter here, believe me. And I just came yesterday, and I'm only home about a week from my trip to Germany. I speak German still. We spoke it at home, English too, of course. But it was an eye-opener. I was disappointed this time. Every year I go over there. It was extremely depressing for me that things like that happening again. I couldn't believe it. I mean, this is not 1939. It's 2019. We just went through all these terrible things, and they're happening again. At least the seeds of them are happening. They don't like the foreigners coming in, and of course, anti-Semitism is rising again. Can you believe it? Some of the states have actual programs against anti-Semitism. We need this in 2019 after what we went through. In fact, my trip was sponsored by one of them, that Westphalia, by the anti-Semitism department. Not everybody, not every state has it, but they're coming up. And I went home disappointed. In a way, yes, I was glad that they are thinking about this problem, but why? Now again? I couldn't believe it. And I tell you, when I come back to America, I felt like kissing the ground. This is my home now. And God bless America. God bless America. Yes, we have our warts, every country does, but this is still the best thing going. Go somewhere, go to Russia, go to any other country, and you come back, you say, when somebody says, when your passport is stamped, welcome home, I said, yes, it's home. Now today, I'm going to reiterate this terrible story that happened to us. And it didn't only happen to Jewish people. It happened, 6 million of us, yes, were killed. Among them, 1.5 million Jewish children. Those 3 million children's eyes still haunt me to this day. There were 5 million others as well. Who were they? They were Christians. They were Jehovah's Witnesses, gypsies, let's say they were not Jewish, and people with mental, physical difficulties, some clergy, some Poles as well. And anybody who was against Hitler had to be killed or treated very badly. And I want to take you now on the journey of my first 10 years growing up in Nazi Europe. And I would like to ask you, maybe it's a dumb question, but no question is dumb. When we speak of being Jewish, now when I go to lower grades, I ask them, what is it to be Jewish? I'm going to ask one person, okay, what is it to be Jewish? What is it?
It's just you believing in something that...
There's one word, it's a religion, okay? And who was the most famous Jew of all time? Who?
Jesus.
Who?
Jesus.
Exactly. So, Jesus was Jewish. Christianity came later. And if you hate me, a Jew, you have to hate Jesus too. He was the same as I. Think about it. In Germany, the whole population was, again, how many? Guess. I'm going to pick on you. You're near. How many Jewish people lived in Germany?
Jewish people, 18 million?
No. Anybody else? Another guess? Anybody? I'm picking on you. First row. Okay, how many?
10.
I tell you how many. 500,000. All right? That was the total. And Jewish people lived in Germany for close to 2,000 people. 2,000 years. They came very early with the Romans, settled in the Rhineland, and moved around, went to Poland afterwards and all other countries. We are a religion based on the Old Testament. You believe in the Old Testament. Actually, you look at the Bible. 2/3 of the Bible is the Old Testament. The New Testament is maybe 1/3. So we have more in common than we think. It's a religion, period. Now I'm going to take you on a tour of my life in pictures. And at the end, I hope you have some good questions, because no question is stupid. Stupid not to ask at this point. We're not going to be around that much longer. I intend to. You know, Moses lived till 120 years, so I have a few years to go. That's what we wish, till 120. And maybe I want 121. I'm greedy. Okay, and Dr. Atlas is going to be my clicker. And so let's go. Let's go on this journey, pack our bags, and go. Next. I was born in a little village called Kippenheim. You won't find it on the map. It's in southwest Germany, very close to France and Switzerland. A village of about 2,000 people, 60 Jewish families. And Jewish people lived there for close to 300 years now. And I was the last Jewish child to be born in that village. Next. The house I was born in, we had a fairly large house. The house also is close to 300 years at this time, and it has been renovated. Now they have an Airbnb in the left side. And yes, we're up to modern times. It's owned by, of course, different people. But actually, the family who bought it originally in '39 still has it. But it's a very large house with a courtyard inside. And when you look on the second floor, those two windows on top, that's the room I'm born in. And when I slept, as I told you, the first time again since I was maybe 4 years old, in that part, the left part, and it was all renovated, beautiful, and the newspaper did this story on it. Now, I was born at home, and of course you think all doctors are Jewish, you know, it's again this cliche. Well, the doctor who brought me into this world was not Jewish. On the contrary, he already belonged to the Nazi party. So he came with his uniform, but he still took very good care of his patients, very good care, Jewish patients. And later on, to make a career for himself, he did terrible things. He was involved, most likely, in euthanasia, killing people with mental and physical difficulties. And he was jailed for many years after the war. I never saw him again. You have choices in life. Choose good. He had a choice. Is he going to stay a real doctor, taking good care of patients? Or will he get involved in just becoming a bad person, maybe just like Dr. Mengele, let's say? He had his choice too, to do terrible things. He chose bad. And when I spoke at the United Nations to the world, because they heard me, actually it was live, it was an International Holocaust Day, they heard me in my village. They took pictures as they saw me on television. My friend took pictures in Sicily. She saw me too. And you have choices in life. Choose good, please. That's what I said to the audience around the world. Next. I was an only child. My father had a business, a textile merchant. We weren't millionaires. We were comfortable. Dad had already a car. Now, that was a big deal in those days. So when my father proposed to my mom, he came in this shiny black car, which was very elegant in those days. The doctor had a car, very few people. And of course, she said, of course, I will marry you. So she could show off to her girlfriends that, you know, her beau has a car. Imagine that. That was a big, big deal. And I was the last Jewish child born in this village. And they gave me a real German name, Inge. Everybody at that time was either Ingrid, Ingeborg. And when I go to Germany, I go every year at least once. I speak German still perfectly. I ask him, do you have a grandma or great-grandma whose name is Inge or Ingrid? And the hands just go up. Because that was the name for the people at that time, the girls being born. I was born December 31, 1934. Now, you don't have to figure this out. I'll save you the problem. I'm 84 years young. I'm heading now for my 85th birthday. Yeah, I have gray hair, but they're covered. I can be any color I wish. That's a prerogative. Getting older, you can be a redhead, or even before, or green, or red. My friend in Sicily, she likes blue hair, so she chooses blue. Next. My father was a soldier in World War I, and he was wounded quite badly in his right shoulder, and he received the Iron Cross. My grandmother's family, her mother, great-grandma, had 14 children, and she had 4 sons in World War I. Really hard. Imagine a mother with 4 sons in the war. 2 died for Germany. And then some of the others were killed. Can you imagine? You are fighting for your country, and then they kill you for that? Thank you. Next. Here I am in my sandbox, thinking already, I'm going to be a scientist one day. And I made wonderful mud pies, my first experiments as a chemist, and they were delicious. Next, a nice excursion to the Black Forest, which was very nearby. And I'm wearing the traditional German little dress, the dirndl dress with the puffy sleeves. You go to a German restaurant, all the waitresses will wear these puffy sleeves and the aprons. And all the little German girls, the little kids would wear those dresses. So I was a typical German little girl. Next. And this is a monument to a tailor. He actually lived in the house before my great-great-grandfather bought it, and he became very famous in England. They called him the Fashion King of London, became very wealthy. He was born in the same house. And before my great-grandfather bought it from that family, he was not Jewish, and he came back. On his name day, probably Catholic, he gave bread to the poor. He opened up an orphanage in the Black Forest. And to honor him, and he was knighted, and to honor him, they built this little tower. And that was my favorite place, running around, all the children. Kippenheim loved doing that. And there's a plaque today on the house that he was born there, but they put next to it that I was also born in this house. I feel very good that the house has really good karma. A very good, wonderful man, a good man, was born in the same house. And I actually met some of his relatives not too long ago. Next. The time is now getting very serious. It's 1938, the time when everything changed, everything. It was Kristallnacht time, the night of broken glass. I don't know how many of you have studied this. How many of you have studied Kristallnacht when the Holocaust really began? Some of you. But it was the first major riot against the Jewish people in Germany and in Austria. My grandparents came to see us. They lived about 200 kilometers away. They came often, and we would go to see them in a different state. They were in the state of Wuerttemberg. I was born in the state of Baden. Those 2 states are together today, and they hate each other still. I always say I come from a mixed marriage. My mother was from Württemberg, my father from Baden, and I'm in between. And you see my grandparents there, and my parents, And I came from a religious Jewish family, modern Orthodox, where the men have to, and the boys too, have to keep their head covered. The reason is that God is always above you. The Muslims do it too, with a cap. But my grandfather would never wear this yarmulke, we call it, the skull cap, outside. He would wear a hat. But you know, the Pope and the cardinals, they also wear the same skull cap. And I think you stole that from us, among other things. Good things, good things. And I have something very special here. My doll. That was a present from my grandmother when I was 2 years old. And if she could talk, she could tell a big story, because she was the only piece, the only thing that would survive those 3 years in the camp. And I gave her to the Holocaust Museum some years ago. She was blonde, blue-eyed, and I showed this picture of when I give a talk in Germany too. And I gave her the name Marlene. And there was a very famous movie star, Marlene Dietrich. And does that mean anything to you? No. It does a little bit. Well, she was a very sexy lady. And very ultra famous. She came to America eventually. And my mother loved movie stars. So she had this album, and I said, Mom, who is that lady with the blonde hair? I like her. And she said, that's Marlene Dietrich. So my doll became Marlene. But in Germany, one day, somebody saw this picture. She said, your doll was famous. I said, well, for me, she was. And do you know what? Her name was actually Inge, your name. They had the doll factory made a special Inge doll for the 1938 Olympics in Berlin, the Hitler Olympics, you know, blonde hair, blue eyes. And so we made a film actually some years ago, the Olympic doll. And the name, and they make that doll again, very famous company, Schildkröt Puppenfabrik. I don't want you to repeat that, because I think it will be very difficult. So this doll is now in the Holocaust Museum, but she is packed away because she's quite brittle. I mean, she's my age, but I think I'm in better shape than she is. I'm not in a box, I'm still traveling. Next. Here was our synagogue in Kippenheim, beautiful building, and we observed the Sabbath on Saturday. So on November 9th and 10th, there was this major riot against the Jewish people where they burned down all the synagogues or desecrated them, as I said, in Austria and in Germany. Grandpa went to the synagogue in the morning. It was by us on November 10th to say his morning prayers. He was arrested from his prayers and sent to the Dachau concentration camp. Police came to our house and arrested my father, also to Dachau. All men and boys from the age of 16 were sent to concentration camps or between the November 9th and 10th. And the only women and children were left in our little village. And then the rumpus began. All the windows in our house were broken, in all the Jewish houses. And I remember standing in the living room, glass all over the floor. That's why it's called Kristallnacht, because of the crystal. The piece of glass looked like crystals. And then one of the hoodlum looked through the broken window and yelled, oh, the chandelier still hangs, and threw a big rock, which my mother just pulled me away. I was not even 4 years old at that time. And I remember it as clear as day, as if it happened today. And then we were hiding in a neighborhood, in the house. We had in the back of the house a shed, and we were hiding there, and they were banging on the door. All the men and the boys were gone. And this was the synagogue before its destruction. Next, please. inside very beautiful. In the Jewish faith, we have a rabbi and a cantor, because our prayers are mainly sung, so you need somebody with a good voice. In our case, we only had a cantor who did the rabbinical work as well. He had a double duty. And beautiful service. The Christians went to their church on Sunday. We went on Saturday. That was the only difference. We lived house to house, no separation, and had a fairly good relationship. We were Kippenheimers like everybody else. Next. They wanted to burn the building down, but there were Christian houses nearby, and they stopped that. And they desecrated the synagogue very badly. And we got this picture a while ago, and we're very grateful for that, because there are very few pictures available of anything that happened in Germany. I mean, we only had this population about 500,000. In Poland, you had 3 million. In Hungary, also 2-3 million. Some other countries. But Germany, that you think where all these people living, it's not true. We only had around 500,000. And you can see the actual destruction, and people were watching. Even you see a little girl watching. And that is a problem, the bystanders. If you are a bystander, you're equally guilty. That's what Elie Wiesel, the Nobel Prize winner, says. So you cannot, even today when you see terrible things happen, especially when I speak to younger people with, doing bad things to each other, and, you have to tell the teacher and not to get hurt, by yourself, but don't just be a bystander, but don't get hurt either. But that's also being the bystander in this new party coming up in Germany, the AfD, the alternate party. And I warned them, don't join it. Don't. Only horrible things will happen to you. And that's what I warned them to from the podium in the United Nations, where all the famous people have spoken, and here I am, putting my finger to the world. No more genocides, no more Holocaust, make good choices, and that's my message. Make good choices. Don't follow these evil people. You don't have to be popular. And so I spoke in many schools now over there in 1 week. At least 4 schools in 1 week was a lot, 4 different towns. Next. The synagogue looked like this for many years. It's the first time when I went over there. This is what it looked like. And it was bought up by a company that has agricultural products, pig food. It was filled up with pig food. And that's what it looked like for many years. Next. Today it looks like this again, rebuilt from the outside, but the 10 Commandments are on top without any Hebrew lettering. It is no longer a house of God. It is a symbol. Once wonderful Jewish people lived together with us in peace. It sits right smack in the middle of the village. And they had many wonderful programs there, not only Jewish, other things too, concerts, readings. I've spoken quite a few times in there too. And I will say the 2 most beautiful buildings in the village are the former synagogue. It's no longer synagogue. There are no Hebrew letters on the 10 Commandments, just tablets. And the city hall. Those are the 2 beautiful buildings. The village is still not much bigger than 2,000. They have gotten together with another village, so maybe about 5,000. Today, it has grown, but not much. It looks the same as before, just about. Next. Now, the men are all gone. We didn't know where, but they were in Dachau. And when they came back, somehow they permitted them to come back home a few weeks later. And actually, my mother bought some bogus ticket to South America somewhere. It wasn't a real ticket, and she got my dad out. But they did permit most of the men to come home again to say, now we showed them, get out of here, or this is what's going to happen to you. And they told the terrible stories. They had to give up all their clothing, wear the blue and white prison uniforms, stand at attention for many, many hours in the bitter cold, no underwear, nothing. And if somebody wanted to blow their nose, they were hosed down with ice cold water. And that happened to my dad a few times. And they said, you can throw away your iron cross. It means nothing to us. You are just a dirty Jew. And up to that time, we never wanted to leave Germany. My father said, look, I'm a disabled war veteran. I fought. I'm a proud German. And where shall we go? And finally, it occurred to him, it's time to leave. But where? The doors to the free world were closing very rapidly. You couldn't get to America. My mother had a brother already in America because my aunt had an uncle who was a butcher, and he gave them papers, and I guess they were a little smarter than we were. They got out. But my father said, this crazy Hitler, he'll go away. And this is again the same problem today. I told the people, I said, get out while the going is good. But where should we go? It's always the problem. Where do we go? What do? We don't want to give up this, we don't want to give up that. But you find out in life that to have a house or property or whatever you have means nothing. Your life is most important. To save your life. Everything else can be gotten again. So then we sold our house. The time is now 1939. And we thought we could still get out. We moved in with my mother's family, my grandparents, in a tiny village, about 1,000 people. At one time, that village was 40% Jewish. That's very rare in Germany. They had to live separate, but they got permission to butcher their animals, like in a kosher way, a certain way. Muslims do it too. And a cemetery, they gave them land for that, very bad land, and they had to live along this hill. But eventually, they all lived together, but around 1850, most of them went to America for a better life or the bigger cities, except my branch of the family. They stayed. And I will say, in that village, all the children played with me. The people were decent to us, really, most of them, and they stayed good neighbors. And they had the choice. In fact, some people would tell my girlfriend's mother, don't let her play with the Jew girl. She said, why not? Her mother was my best friend, and they are now two best friends. And she died, unfortunately, now a few years ago. She was my very best friend from childhood on till I came, till she died a few years ago. And we would go up and down this little street singing the songs of the day, which were many times Nazi songs. We didn't even know what we were singing. And when you look on the left side, one of the last houses, it's hard to see here, but imagine it where it is. I can't point to one of the last houses on the left side. There was a little tiny, tiny bakery. And that bakery belonged to Albert Einstein's great-grandparents. I never knew that. And Albert must have gone there, walked the same hill. And he was my hero. I wanted to be a scientist just like him. And we went once to Princeton where he lived. We couldn't find the place. Nobody knew. And I'm sure he would have invited me in because of this same little village where his family came from. And also, I'm the only Jewish child from that whole state who was deported to any of the camps, any transport to the camps, who came back. I'm the only child. Next. This was my grandparents' house. They owned it also, more than 200 years, living in that village. Grandpa was a cattle dealer, small time, and he kept his cows in a stable in the house. The stable was right where you see the black door, and here we walked up to the living quarters. And I tell you, those were really the few very happy years, and they were very short, of my early childhood. I would sit on the cows, I walked barefoot. It was a real country life. I miss that even to today. When I go to the West Coast, for instance, some of the great ranches, or Texas, I was in the King Ranch, the biggest ranch in all of America. I just love it. I want to smell those cows again. I want that memory of having a real childhood, which I really didn't have, very short time. Next. And here's my best friend Elizabeth, whom I talked about. She just passed away a few years ago. Always my doll is with me. Next. My grandfather died soon after Kristallnacht in 1939, both of a broken heart, physically and spiritually. He couldn't believe his beloved Germany had forsaken him. And he's the last Jew to be buried in the small Jewish cemetery in Jebenhausen, where they lived, the little village. And he has a different kind of grave, only a plate. The others have beautiful monuments, and we did that on purpose. Because at that time, the Jewish cemeteries were starting to be desecrated, and we did not want anything to happen to my grandfather's grave. And nothing did happen, except it has sunk in the ground quite badly. But that's how it is. It was not desecrated, and that's a good thing. He's the last Jew to be buried there. Next. These pictures are very, very special. There are very few available of the deportation of the Jews into the camps, and this is one of them. In 1940, the state of Baden expelled every single Jew from the whole state. We were no longer living there, to a place called Gurs, G-U-R-S, in France. In the Basque region, near the Spanish and French border, very far away. Had we still lived there, we would have been taken as well. And somebody gave us these pictures, very super rare to have them. And you see actually my part of my family, cousins, distant cousins, being deported. They gave them just maybe a half an hour, pack up something and leave everything behind. Put your keys on the table, go, just like that. And here's one of my relatives, that whole family. He has his school bag in the hand. He just got home from school, and right away they deported them. And what's interesting in this picture is the girl watching. We spoke to her, and we asked her, what did you think as your friends are being taken away? Well, I just wanted to watch what's going on, and that's the problem, watching. And she might still be alive, I'm not so sure. A few years ago, she was. They were watching. Next, neighbors that you lived next to for years. Next, here's another one of my cousins, distant cousin. He was taken to Auschwitz. From Gurs, they were sent to Rivesaltes, French camp. Drancy was a very big camp in France, and then Auschwitz. That was the route. Whoever couldn't get out, there was a possibility. Some people had some visas, and they got out, but it was very difficult. Most of them landed up to be killed. Next. And the whole town is watching, even a cow, as you can see. It was an agricultural village. Next. And we know who this man was. We told his daughter, she got out. She was in America. He said, that was your father. It's impossible. Why would he go with a suitcase with a rope around it? That's not very nice. But they had to pack up so quickly, they took anything and went. And he did not make it. He went to Auschwitz eventually. I mean, you only hear the name Auschwitz. There were thousands of camps in Europe. in France, in Germany, in Poland, in Romania, everywhere, thousands. And there were others, I would say, every camp was a death camp. People died from starvation, from disease, and there were camps which were equal in size that killed millions. That was Treblinka, Majdanek, those names you don't hear much about. Each of them were close to 1 million were killed. In Auschwitz, I think 1.1 million, so equal to that. Auschwitz was not the only camp. Thousands. And I would say each camp was a death camp. People died, whether they went into the gas chamber or were shot. My grandmother was shot in Latvia, near Riga in the forest, or starved to death. That is killing. They wouldn't have died otherwise. Next. Now it's 1941. We go, according to the years, it's 40, now 41. 6 years old, I gotta go to school. But Jewish children were not allowed to go to the school where they lived. Only one for the whole state, that was in Stuttgart, a big city. I had to get special permission to go there. In the beginning, my father took me with a bicycle to the train station. We weren't allowed to take a bus, and then by train an hour. And eventually, I went all by myself. So all the children from that state, the Jewish children, had to go to that school. Next. And this was the school, the Jewish Community Center in Stuttgart, one of the classrooms that went 1 to 4 and then 4 to 8. Next. And then it became even more difficult. Eventually, my parents had to do some slave labor, and I went all by myself to school. Imagine, 6 years old. I'm going by train by myself. Because there were some other children, but they didn't want to go. They were playing hooky all the time, and I said, I want to go to school, and even if I have to go myself. And then the time came that we had to wear the yellow star with the word Jude on it. They came on a yellow sheet, poor cloth, and my mother put a backing on it, and you had to wear it on the left side with the word Jude, Jew, in Hebrew-like letters. There were different ones. In Dutch it was Jot. Probably Anne Frank had to wear that one if she went outside. Probably she didn't go very much outside. And then there was one French, Juif, all meaning Jew. You're branded. I brought mine with me today that I actually wore. You see it big here. But this is what it looked like. The size of it, if you can see here, and you had to wear it on your left side over your heart, like this. It covered most of my left side. I was a little girl. My mother put a backing on it because of very poor cloth. It came on the sheet, you had to cut them out, and you still see the threads on it. You can see it here. I ripped that star off on May 8th, 1945, when I was liberated from the Terezin concentration camp in Czechoslovakia. We had to pay for those stars. Everything had to be paid. Even the damage on Kristallnacht, that had to be paid as well. Next. Even the trip to the camp later on. Next. This is about what I looked like in those days. Next. And then the transports began in that part of Germany. And we got our order. My grandmother got her order. And my father, having been an alumnus of a camp, he wrote to the Gestapo, the secret police, that he was a war veteran. Somehow it worked, but not for my grandmother. School was closed after 6 months. I never finished my first grade. Altogether in my life, I missed 8 years of education. 8. To catch up with that was very difficult. And the transports began. We had to leave the house that my grandparents owned. They said, keys on the table, out. So we had to live in only Jewish houses. It was in the slum area. And there were a few children still alive. This was a small bunch. And just an example, how many children were killed You look here and you see one in the middle with a striped hat, that's me. All these other children were killed. That's just a small example. And I wore the striped hat, I'm before you. Next. I went, by the way, to that place where my grandmother and most of these children were taken to, Riga in Latvia. Most of them were sent to the forest near there and shot into mass graves. And I saw that place. I have not been since then the same. I think it bothered me more than going to Auschwitz to see that, or my camp, because I had my beloved grandmother there and all the kids from my school. They have at least 50 mass graves in this one forest alone. There were many forests. It's in Latvia. And you walk up a hill, and there's one mass grave after another, just cement on it, no names, nothing. In fact, I wanted to find out if she's on the list. They have nothing. And then they have a memorial when you walk in with jagged stones, and we walk up this hill, and believe me, I couldn't walk more than maybe 2-3 mass graves. That was enough. There were over 50. Unbelievable. So then our turn came. We were still safe a few months longer. We got the papers, and by the way, this is the first page that you see here of my order for transit as it looks today. It's actually 6 pages, and the Holocaust Museum in Washington took pictures only of the first page. It was August 22nd, 1942. I put it on Facebook, in fact, that I was deported on the 22nd when it happened, on August. And what you can take along, what not. It's quite a document, whoever can read German. My number would be 408, but there was more to it. Roman numeral 13-1-408. It didn't say where we were going, nothing. You have to report on that day, and you're being taken somewhere else, not any name. Next. And this is how a transport was put together. You got your papers. We were assembled in the school gymnasium, and I was the youngest. I was 7 years old. The transport had over 1,100 people, and they would look at everything. There were tables set up, open everything, and all you were allowed to take was a bedroll and some metal dishes and good shoes, a kerchief. And I took my doll, and one of them saw me that I had a little Dutch boy pin. He ripped that off me, one of the people there, the guards, in the school gymnasium, still where we were living, and he yelled at me in the Swabian dialect. Anybody knows German here? Du brauchst es nicht, wo du hingehst. I won't need this where I'm going to. In Swabian, I still speak the dialect very well. And where was I going? And then he saw my doll on my arm, he ripped her from me, and you could see inside her hollow body. You could take the head up, and with rubber bands, she was put together. She had an accident once, so I needed a new head for her. I dropped her, whatever, I had her since I'm 2 years old, so she went through a lot of wear and tear. And of course, he didn't see anything, and he let me keep my doll. And that's how I arrived. Next. And we were sent to Stuttgart, the main gathering place. And this is actually from a film that they took of my grandmother's transport. And there is a woman in the middle. I can't show it to you here, but if you go to the middle, there's one who's bending a little bit. It looks like my grandmother, but I cannot swear to it. That could be the last picture of my grandmother, but only a few months later, we were in the same 2 rooms, big halls, lying on the floor, waiting for the train. Next. In the morning, get your food, a little bit of food, waiting again for the train. Next. And everybody had an ID, but ours was stamped had a J on it, Jew. The others didn't have that. And then they wurde Stamboid umgesiedelt 22nd of August 42. Now when there are people today, this never happened, these Holocaust deniers, it's just ludicrous. I mean, to say that the ovens in Auschwitz made bread, the baked bread, I don't think you would like to taste that bread, believe me. It wouldn't taste very good with all those ashes on it. Next, there's very much evidence it unfortunately did happen. And we don't want any of this to happen to anybody, any of these genocides, Rwanda, and all those terrible things happening today. They're awful. We must get along with each other. We just have to. I live in New York in a row house. And one side is a very devout Muslim family from Bangladesh, which was India at one time, then it became Pakistan and Bangladesh. The other side, the walls are the same, is a house where Indian Hindu family lives, and then another house, Christian house. 4 of the major religions of the world living in harmony together. That is my dream. None of this should happen again to anybody, Jewish or Catholic or whatever you are. No. Say no. Next. Then we went by train. It was still a passenger train, very crowded. And we arrived in Czechoslovakia. It was called Czechoslovakia at that time, a little town called Auschwitz, and we had many old people, and we were told to get off the train, drop everything except your duffel bag, a blanket, and your metal dish. Of course, I had my doll in my arm. I wasn't going to give her away. And we had to walk about close to it was about 2 kilometers, well, close to 2 miles, let's say, very close. And many people couldn't walk, so they dropped by the wayside. Next. And they were whipping us. My parents put me between them, that I shouldn't get the blows. There were no cameras. That's why somebody drew the pictures for me. Next. Marching into the camp was broad daylight. People saw us. Next. Next. Marching into the camp. And it was actually a little town, a fortress town, built in the late 18th century for Emperor Joseph II in memory of his mother Maria Theresa. It was never really used as a fortress. Poor little city, a little town where 6,000 people lived. At one time they put in with us 60,000. It was surrounded by brick walls, barbed wire, and wooden fences, totally sealed off from the outside world. It was a place where the intelligentsia of Europe was sent. The best lawyers, the best doctors, artists, musicians, famous people. In fact, I believe you're going to have the play Brundibar here, I believe, in the college, right?
It's going to be Indianapolis Opera.
Oh, it's India, not the here. Okay, well, it's your town. It's a little opera that was done in Terezin by children, but most of those children were killed. It was an area like where you put cows before the slaughter, because every single one of us was destined to die. They did not have gas chambers at that time. They were in the planning stage. Had the war, not continued, I wouldn't be here. You stayed there a while, and the idea was you're going to be sent to the East. We didn't know what the East meant. Nobody knew about what was happening in Auschwitz. They kept it from us. Only at the end we found out. But every single person in that place was destined to die. Every single one. In fact, all the Jews in Europe. And had Hitler succeeded, who would have been the next group to go? Maybe many of you wouldn't be sitting here either. Whom would he choose? Next. So here are some of the paintings that were done by artists who were sent there clandestinely. If they were caught, they were sent immediately to what was called the small fortress, which was all always a prison. It was divided, the big one where I was, and the smaller one, which was a terrible place. As bad as Auschwitz, maybe in some places even worse. It was a terrible place. It was also where they had not only Jewish people, they have some others too. And this is where the person who started World War I, Princip, was imprisoned. He died of tuberculosis in cell number 1 in the small fortress in Terezin. It was a prison for the prison. Terrible place. Next. And this was surrounded by walls, the whole place. And children are always saying to me, well, why don't you just jump down? Well, how can you jump down? And anyway, we had very little clothing, no money, nothing. You needed somebody to help you on the outside. Who had? There were a few escapes, very few. That made life even worse for us who stayed behind. They punished us for it then. Very few got out. Next. When I arrived, there was a health crisis with scarlet fever. And most of the children had scarlet fever, so did I. And they didn't have enough place where to put us, so they set up some rooms, not a real hospital, 2 in every bed. And I was there from around September till just before my birthday, which is December. And I was in terrible condition. My hair had to be cut really short. I had lice, covered with lice. Very few people take care of me. 2 children in every bed. And I had boils all over my body. I was in terrible shape. And then I joined my parents. And most men, women, and children had to live separate. But the disabled war veterans, these highly decorated people, missing legs, missing arms. One, I remember, had a shot in his head, still draining. He wore a bandage from World War I, a hero. Next. And we lived then in very run-down condition. As I said, most men, women, children had to live separate. They could still see each other, but they had to live separate, except disabled war veterans. And we lived in very bad condition in these run-down houses. And we shared it for 2 out of the 3 years with a family from Berlin. And they had a daughter, Ruth, who was exactly my age. Her birthday was in October, mine in December. Fortunately, she did not make it. Next. Here are the conditions. Of course, you've seen these pictures before. These pictures were taken by the Russian soldiers who liberated us. And your little cubbyhole became your home. And the danger was always there. We're being sent to the east. We didn't know what it meant. Next. And we pumped our water from polluted wells. Many had typhus, tuberculosis, dysentery. The bathrooms were just these latrines far away and no privacy at all. None. One for men, one for women. No stoves in the winter, cold. And in the room that we shared with that family, there was no stove. Only next door, there was a stove. So it was cold. Next. And these wagons brought the bread ration once a week. And my mother would put a notch Monday to Tuesday and so forth. If you went into next day's notch, you didn't have any bread. Food was the most important thing. You dreamt of food. You nearly killed for food. And they also brought the bodies, one of the wagons, to the crematory for the dead people. Next. Standing in line for food 3 times a day. This was taken after liberation. We had a tremendous typhoid epidemic when the Russians came in. So we have a picture of what it looked like. We couldn't leave the camp. So in the morning it was you stood in line with your metal dish, a little black liquid. It tasted like detergent. We cleaned the clothes, whatever we still were given. All the good stuff was taken away. Only used stuff that they didn't want, they gave to us. And lunch was maybe a potato, little soup, all kinds of murky things floating in it. and some turnip. That's the only vegetable I had in 3 years, and the same again at night. And it was not enough to live, not enough to die, but food was the most important thing. Next. What did we children do? The people, the parents and so had to work. They had like slave labor. They had to cut mica. The women cut mica, glimmer it was called, for the war effort. And what did we children? We were good for nothing. I mean, I was quite young, between 7 and 10. So we rummaged around in the garbage dump. And to find a little potato peel and still cut a little off, a rotten turnip. One day I found a doll with no arms and legs, and I just visited in Düsseldorf one of my friends, still alive, the only one that I really was close with. She's in a home now, and she remembered that day that we found this doll with no legs and no arms, and I had a real doll, and she says, I wanted that doll because I had nothing, and you didn't give it to me. She remembered that, and she still blamed me to this day. I didn't give her the doll without legs and arms. But we are friends, you know, she's doing okay. Not health-wise, but she's doing okay. Next. My mother worked as a so-called nurse. She never was that before. And with these old women, we had a lot of old people in the camp, a lot, who died very quickly. That's what they wanted. They wanted them to die quickly. Very many prominent people, famous people. And I remember going there one day as my mother was working, and the women had sticks in their hands. I said, what's going on? Well, it turned out that one of them felt something heavy on her shoulder, and she turned around. A rat was sitting there. It was filled up with terrible things, mice, rats, fleas, and bedbugs. Those were our companions. In fact, one morning, I found in my little box a terrible broken down cardboard box where I kept my doll on the head of my bed, a little black thing, grayish thing. I said, what is this? A mouse, a dead mouse. She couldn't even find enough crumbs to stay alive. Next. The worst day I can remember happened November 11th, 1943. They said a count out had to be taken. They knew exactly how many people were there. Everybody had to go, sick or not, into this ravine-like area with soldiers with guns in their hand pointing. They didn't shoot, but they pointed. It was a terrible, rainy, muddy day. And everybody, I mean, it was really, we lost hope. My mother said, this is it. We were not going to get out. And my father, who was always the optimist, which I am too, I inherited that, thank God. He said, don't you worry, you're going to ride in that car again. Remember, the car, very important. And it did happen very late at night, because I think they had it on the British radio. I read it somewhere that there are at least 40,000 people standing there, because we had between 1941, it started in Terezin, we came in 42 till 45, about 140,000 people. 2/3 would be shipped out to Auschwitz or other camps too, but mainly Auschwitz, which the line would go straight there, and close to a third died there of malnutrition. And we had among them 15,000 children under the age of 15. Very few of them made it. I'm one of those very lucky children. I was 10 years old at the end of the war. Next. School was absolutely forbidden, but some heroic teachers taught us from memory. And my father had found a little notebook with a few good pages, and I had a stump of a pencil, and somebody knew a little English. She taught me this poem in English. I didn't know it. I wish I were a little bird up in the bright blue sky that sings and flies just where he will, and no one asked him why. We wanted to fly away. And the Czech children had a little bit better. They had a few rooms, where they had some teachers, but the German children had very little of that. Very, very precious little. Next. In 1944, the International Red Cross became interested to see one of those camps, and they chose Terezin. Not before beautification took place. They even made money with which ghetto money, which you couldn't do anything with. Maybe buy some mustard, which made you even more hungry. And they put signs up to school, to playground. None of these existed. Painted houses, and they made it look that not so many people lived there. They sent some to Auschwitz to clear up the area a little bit. Some children who were selected, who still looked good, some sardine sandwiches. They ate them down so quickly, and they had to say, Uncle Ram. Uncle Ram was the last commandant of Terezin, or Theresienstadt. And one of my friends actually was there. They ate it up quickly, and they had to give them more. And so they had also this little children's opera, which will be done here. It's very famous today. I spoke at one in Moscow not too long ago. All over the world today. I was not in it. I don't speak Czech, only German. But I saw it. And they saw that, and they were only there, I think, a day. They made a film about that. You can see it on YouTube. The Führer gives the Jews a city. All lies. People smiling and like they're having a great time. It was a hoax. It was a theatrical production, the whole thing. And they went away believing this hoax. And that it's okay, they're incarcerated, but they're getting sardine sandwich, they're playing games, even a soccer game. As soon as they were away, almost the whole camp was sent to Auschwitz. There were some selections. My father and my girlfriend's father went together, because they were both disabled war veterans. The name was Auerbacher, my name, and Abraham, hers. And when he came back, he said to my girlfriend's father, did you go to the one with the typewriter? And did you have a circle drawn around your name? He said, no, but we did, and it meant death. Just like that, you couldn't do anything. The throw of the dice. And she was sent to Auschwitz, and she still gave me some of her doll's clothing sewn from rags. And now I met in Germany some of her family who lived in Israel a while, came back to Germany. We had our first meeting. And even one of the kids from the family, she in school read the book that I wrote. It was in German too. And I dedicated it to Ruth and Tommy, the Czech boy. She had no idea that this dedication was to her cousin, Ruth. And now I met them. Unbelievable. Next, and here's the money that we had. The crematory, they didn't show them, of course, where over 30,000 were cremated. Next. Finally, on May 8th, 1945, we were liberated by the Russian army, and they burned some of the records. And I remember I heard the cars going away. It was a lot of noise. I jumped one of the wooden fences, and just as I did, I heard a big explosion. I thought, what happened? They were throwing in hand grenades as they were retreating, the Germans. Of course, they were caught afterwards. Next. And these are some of the people from the death marches. They were brought in because Eichmann, who was in charge of the whole question, they were probably, you might have seen on television, Eichmann, does that mean anything to you, that name? He was in charge of the whole Jewish question. I saw him there. He came quite often. And even at the end, people who were still alive in other camps, they brought them to us. Now, Auschwitz was liberated in January. We had a long day, long time, still to go till May 8th, a long time. And what I did in Moscow, on my first trip to Moscow, I found out who the general was, the Russian general who liberated us. His name is Rybalko. I went to the cemetery. I put flowers on his grave. And the flowers of Russia is really red, white, and blue. Yes, they have the hammer and sickle, the red. But this is their flag. And we have the same colors. I put those flowers on his grave. And I had somebody from the Jewish community, a man, said prayers for him. I wanted prayers to be said for gratefulness. I also visited to be thankful to President Truman, who permitted us to come to America, to visit his grave. I did that too. One should never be ungrateful for great things. I never knew Rybalko. He has a huge grave in Moscow, 10-foot statue of him right there, or maybe even more. Next. And then we were liberated by the Russians, and then a few weeks later we went home. I make it just quickly what happened, a few words. And of course, nobody was alive. My grandmother wasn't staying at the door. And we had the opportunity to come to America. We took the second boat that came over with legal, because President Truman opened the doors to us as legal immigrants. And my aunt and uncle had lived in America already. My parents got a job as a butler and a maid. My mother became a maid in this millionaire's house. And all of a sudden, I had a very bad cold. And the person, the one who owned the house, the family, said, well, we should take her to the doctor. I don't like his coughing so hard. And I went to the doctor, and there was a girl in the camp who got a little bit more food. But we were told, don't go near her. She has a terrible sickness. And you will catch it. It's really bad. But I prayed to God, I want to have what she has. And what was it? It was tuberculosis. So right away, after a few weeks in America, I was placed into a community hospital on a ward for 2 years in bed. There was no cure at that time, no cure. Either you lived or you died. There was nothing. Stay in bed forever. After 2 years, my parents said, it's enough. They got an apartment by that time in Brooklyn, 3rd floor up, cold water flat. Still no school. We had a little bit of school in the hospital, but it wasn't really school. We were too sick. And again, 1 year in bed, and then a new drug came out, streptomycin, which saved my life. And luckily, I actually met the man who was a co-discoverer, and I could put my arms around him and say, thank you for saving my life. And this went on for years and years until some more drugs were discovered. 26 pills a day, staying in bed, and 2 shots of very painful streptomycin for a year. This went on twice. Finally, at age 15, I started school. I never even finished my first grade. I finished high school in 3 instead of 4 years because I went to summer school. Then I started college. I wanted to be a scientist or a doctor, something in science. And after a few weeks, I got sick again. 1 year in bed, 26 pills a day and 2 shots of streptomycin. Finally, I got better, and I had a very good life since then. I worked very hard for 38 years in the laboratory, clinical research and clinical work. And I somehow, a few years ago, I wanted to see with adult eyes, did I live through this? It wasn't only, people talk, the camps were terrible. But my years, what happened afterwards? The result of that time. And most people came out pretty good. I mean, certainly emotionally, they had no family. Most of them were in pretty good shape. Thank God, I wasn't. I was in terrible shape, but I got over it. And you always have to have hope in your heart. You have to never live without hope and being positive. Very important. You can't always be smiling, obviously. And then I went, after working some years, I went back to see what was it like. Was I dreaming? So I went back. So it was 60 kilometers north of Prague. Next, we do it very quickly now. I went in, it looked the same. The Russians were still there at that time, so I had to be very careful what pictures I took. Next. And I found the house that I lived in 2 out of the 3 years, still very dirty, rats crawling. Next. and the street from where the trains went straight to Auschwitz. Next. And the crematory, they had it's again a city, a little town, poor town, and they're renovating the building because they're in terrible shape. And I met the mayor of the town. I've been back a few times with students and teachers, so forth. Next. And we had one of the biggest crematories, still it could function today. One of the best, you don't need any renovation, it's still in good shape. 4 ovens. Some very famous people have been there. I mean, they go as a memorial. Next. And they have flowers, red flowers depicting blood. It's much bigger today. It's a huge memorial in the small fortress where they kept everything the way it was. Next. And I wanted to thank the German people who helped us, especially one person, my hero, was Teresa, my grandmother's maid and good friend. And she was more of a friend than anything else, and she saved these pictures that you saw. Otherwise, there would be nothing. And when the Americans came in, they knocked on the door, and she didn't open right away, and the soldier shot through the door, instantly killing her. Yeah. So I say, if there's a heaven, there are 2 people, hand in hand, one Christian, one Jewish, forever united. But one thing I didn't tell you about the star. My father, when I was going to school, wearing the star all alone, he said, try to sit in such a way that you can hide the star. In other words, try to find the left window on the train. There were always some boys who would yell at me, you dirty Jew, etc. And one woman saw me. She didn't have a star, so obviously she wasn't Jewish. She walked by me, and she had a little brown paper bag, probably her lunch for the day, some rolls in it. She put them next to my seat and walked away. I never forgot this good woman who didn't want to be a bystander, who wanted to do something. And wherever I go, I speak about this woman. So there were 2 heroes in my life, the righteous. There were few, but there were some, and they deserve Nobel Prizes, believe me. If I had to give out a Nobel Prize, I'd give it to somebody like that. The woman with the rolls, whom I never knew the name, and Teresa. 2 wonderful, good people. Now, next. This is Teresa's grave. I went to see it. Next. I'm still very good friends with them. Even great-grandchildren, and this is the last picture. It means the world to me. That was my girlfriend, Ruth. And I got that picture only because I put a story, actually I wrote to a newspaper in Germany, the Tagesspiegel, the Daily Mirror, that I'm looking for a picture of my friend Ruth Abraham. She lived in Berlin in this house. Does anybody have a picture? She had a Christian grandmother, so maybe somebody's there. 2 people answered. One was a journalist that was good for nothing. He wanted a story. But then another lady who does these searches for lost people, she found actual people who were related to her, and they had a picture of her when she was maybe 3 years old. That's all that's left. And these are the people I just met. Now, I want to read you one more thing. I like to write in my kitchen, on my kitchen table. One day, I'm sitting there, and I'm thinking of my girlfriend. I'm going to sit down now. Oh, my bones. Don't get old. Don't get old, but stay young. I'm thinking of my girlfriend. How did she feel? When she went with her mother in the gas chamber, because the mothers went with the children. That was an instant death sentence for the women if they had children. And I wrote this poem, Hold Me Tight. That's in my first book, now 30 years in print. Penguin is the biggest publisher in America, published it all these years. And I have some copies. Later on, you can come and talk to me too. And I wrote this poem, Hold Me Tight. A mother giving hope when there's no more hope. Come with me, my child. Hold my hand. Be calm, my child. Do not try to understand. Don't be afraid, my child. Walk with pride. You know your mother is here at your side. Hold me tight. Day has turned to night. Soon we'll see the light. A mother's giving hope in a place where there is no hope. No, no, don't look at the chimneys. See the blue sky. My arm is around to protect you. Don't cry. Come close. Let the blows fall on me. There'll be a day when again we'll be free. Hold me tight. Day has turned to night. Soon we'll see the light. Give all your belongings to them. Quickly undress. One day soon, we will again have happiness. Sleep, my child. I have no more to give. Oh God, we're not going to live. Hold me tight. Day has turned to night. Hold me tight. Thank you. Thank you.
So I'm actually directing the production of Brundabar.
Oh, wonderful.
And my question for you, since I'm working with kids, is there any message that I can share with them that will just help them realize how special this is now that we're coming up on the 75th anniversary of when most of these camps were liberated?
Well, to be kind, to be reasonable with everybody, to be kind, to make, you have choices. That's my first thing. Choices in life. Are you going to follow bad people like this AFD or whatever groups we have in this country? Join the good people, stay and be hopeful. Be hopeful, but especially the choices in life you make makes you that person.
Other questions?
Anybody? Yeah, here's somebody. I see.
Hi.
Stand up, please, so we begin to see who you are. Please, if you can.
I know this is probably difficult for you to talk about, but did you develop PTSD from such?
No. Look, we don't come out, all of us, as, whatever. I mean, most of us did very well, emotionally, you have to be hopeful in life. I'm not saying some people, had depressions. They may have had a tendency anyhow before. But, no, but physical illnesses, yes. Like me, I had TB, which followed me a lot of my life. I would like to hear something from you about forgiveness.
Other questions? Yes, over here.
You probably asked a lot about what was the worst part of this experience, but I want to know what was probably the most hopeful thing for you to hold on to throughout the entire thing. What was the thing that gave you hope? Because hope probably kept you alive through most of that.
Well, I was lucky to be together with my parents because they did separate families. And they, of course, I felt they would take care of me. But my father was always the hopeful one. Someday we're going to get out of this. It has to happen. And I'm very happy that I did inherit those genes. My mother was not quite the same. She gave up when we were standing on that field with the guns pointing at us. She said, "This is it. We're finished." My father, "Don't worry, we'll get out of it." Well, it didn't look so good on that day, believe me. Yeah. Yes. Yes, please, you, yeah.
Have you ever come to terms with, like, forgiving the...
Good. Yeah, I've talked about that quite a bit. I had many discussions with rabbis, with priests, with any clergy, any religion. Now, I wrote a book together with a Polish Catholic woman who was in labor camps, exactly my age. We wrote a book together, Children of Terror. It's on Amazon too. It came out in Polish too. We did a whole tour in Poland for a month. And she said, "Look, I'm Christian, I'm Catholic. Jesus died for all sins, I have to forgive." I said, "Well, I'm Jewish. It's a little different." In fact, actually, the idea is in the Jewish faith. Of course, you make up your own mind. But if you do harm to somebody, you have to ask for forgiveness 3 times to that person to get forgiveness. But what about when the person is no longer alive? Who is going to forgive you? I feel there are such crimes which were perpetrated during that time. The killers, I'm talking right now of the actual killers, the one who killed my grandmother, the one who shoved in the people in the gas chambers, those people. I think they have a different court. Only the court on high, God can forgive them. That is my own idea. But I do believe in reconciliation. The last time I was in Auschwitz, there's a big walk from Birkenau, from Auschwitz 1 to Auschwitz 2, and I didn't want to walk that far, close to 2 miles of walking, and I heard German, just as the road goes down, and I said, "Oh my God, in this place, German." I went over, there were young people, maybe 7, 8 people in a family, a young family. And I said, "You know, I was in a camp, not here, somewhere else, but I lost people in this place too." The first thing we did was to embrace. They had not done anything, you understand? I have many friends in Germany today, maybe more than I have in America. And I can believe in reconciliation, but forgive I'm talking about actual killers who mow down people like in Riga in the forest, innocent people and children. I think only God can be the judge for them, and not humans. My opinion.
One more question. Rear?
How did this whole experience change your relationship with the Lord or your family's relationship with the Lord?
With the Lord, I am still who I am. I would never change my religion. I may not be as religious as I was as a little girl, but I am a Jew. I will die as a Jew. And if I had to do it again, my religion means a lot to me. That's my faith. I was born this way. I didn't choose it myself. It was chosen for me, but it's a heritage I have, and I proudly have that heritage. It didn't change one bit my belief. I am what I am. I am. Now, you should be proud who you are too, whatever it is, whether you're a Hindu or a Hutu Hutus were not the bad. Who were the bad people in Rwanda? I better not talk about what? It doesn't matter at this point. But, it matters, the ones who died. But whether you're a good Muslim, you are what you are. You're not a terrorist. I think this is going. But anyway, can you still hear me? I talk loud. So be proud who you are. Don't be ashamed. Don't be ashamed. Whether you go to your church on Saturday, Sunday, or Friday. It doesn't matter. We should appreciate each other. You know, learn from each other.